Hello everyone. Today we're going to be going over the very first lesson in drawing, which is mark making. Different types of marks are used to show different types of things and to discover different types of things in what you're observing. The most important thing in these practices is to try to use the correct kind of mark making for the piece of information that you're trying to communicate, okay? So anytime you do exercises like this, you should always try to look at real objects. So I'll show you what I'm looking at over here. I've set up a still life, right? Of just a bottle, a can of acrylic paint, and a little votive candle that I happen to have in my studio, right? And you want to use simple shapes in the beginning. Don't choose anything that is too complicated until you really kind of master it, right? So there are three basic types of mark making that we are going to be practicing in class to kind of learn how to control the way that our hand and our eye are connected, okay? So the very first type of mark making is one that you're going to have fun with, hopefully. It's called the silhouette mark, right? Silhouette, S-I-L-H-U-A-T-T-E, silhouette mark, right? And the silhouette mark is used to discover the shape of the item from the inside out. And this is what it kind of looks like, okay? So I look at the item, when you're drawing like this, you always draw from the closest item to you and you work your way backwards, right? So right now, the paint jar is the closest thing to me, right? So I'm gonna start with that. Okay, and I'm going to actually start with making a very, 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 very tight circle of darkness, right? I'm not going to give myself an outline to help me out because that's kind of cheating. I'm going to take my darkest pencil. You want to use a really dark pencil, if not a charcoal stick or something like that. And I'm going to start making that little dark mark grow and get bigger and bigger until I start controlling the shape of it to create the shape of the item that I'm looking at the way that I'm looking at it, right? So I'm looking at the item, I'm keeping my wrist and my elbow off the table, and I am just going in really, really, really tight circles, trying to make as solid a shade of black as possible, right? And then little by little, looking at the items on the table, going back and forth, always trying to control my hand. And eventually, I'm gonna start trying to control my mark making. Okay, I'm trying to control my mark making so that I can start creating the shape that I see in front of me, right? And I'm not really worried about details at this point. I'm just trying to control that shape. So right now, I'm trying to control the curve that's at the top of the bottle. And at the top of the jar of paint. And I'm gonna kind of try to create this and try to control this form that is happening. And notice that I kind of start in the middle and I slowly let it get bigger and bigger and bigger until I start controlling the size that I need it to be, right? We don't make an outline and then just fill it in because that means that my brain can fall asleep and I don't have to think about what my hand is doing. And that's not what this is for. This is so that you can have to actively control how your hand is moving to create the shape that you're looking at. So now I'm going to start building this down. I'm building it down, I'm building it down, I'm building it down, right? And I'm kind of keeping it in the center and I'm looking at it and I'm like, okay, so I'm comparing its height with its width and I'm looking at the item constantly and this is about like this tall and then I'm going to start kind of building this way, showing little like how the edge of it is kind of has a divot because there's a really fat kind of jar top to it. So I'm gonna kind of show that and I'm gonna again try to controlling my hand until I kind of really start kind of trying to create the edge of the object just by kind of darkening the whole thing in. right? And then starting to make that really tight mark, right? And then really fine tuning it, right? And now I'm gonna work this way, and I'm gonna bring this darkness this way, and this kind of comes right up to here, and then I start making my tight marks. Again, always constantly trying to control what my hand is doing, trying to look and make sure that the shape is correct. It's actually a little bit wider, so I can fix that by just adding a little bit more darkness, right? And I keep on going, controlling my hand, making that tight mark, trying to make it like look like a solid blackness that eventually, as I start controlling it, becomes the shape of the jar. And then looking at that jar shape and kind of really trying to make sure that that is the form of it. Okay, so I'm looking at this shape, I'm looking at the jar on my table, which kind of looks like this, right? And I'm trying to compare the two things. As I'm looking at it right now, I realize that I could actually make it a little bit taller. It's actually a little bit taller. So again, looking at it, you want to try to make it as accurate to the shape of the item as possible. So since it's a little bit taller, I want to make this a little bit longer, and I want to add a little bit more to the bottom until I truly find the shape of that object. And then the most important thing is that I'm trying to find the shape of that object from the inside and work my way out. Let it grow into the shape, right? That's what we're working on. Now, I'm gonna move on to, now that I have this kind of set up, I'm gonna move on to my next shape. So my next shape is that little tiny votive candle that I have right next to here. It looks like this, right? It is shorter than this item. It is thinner than this item. It's still cylindrical, but it has a specific shape to it, and it's important to compare that shape to the first shape and make sure that you're putting it in the right place. So as I'm looking at the items over here on my little side table, I am going to be like, okay, well, it's right about there. And I'm gonna start with my little circle of darkness. And I am going to allow that shape to build up, right? And the top of this thing reaches right about here. And then it kind of has a width to it. So I'm gonna let that darkness grow. And the way that I have it set up over here on my counter, they're almost touching. They're almost touching right there, right? And then the darkness kind of comes down, and this is curved because it's a round thing, and it has a very specific curve to it. And then this comes down, and 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 it's just a little bit lower than the other item is. And then I'm looking at it, and I'm looking at it, and I'm trying to control how my hand is moving, and trying to create the shape of the item, and trying to compare, and trying to be accurate. It's not just filling it in and absent-mindedly making a darkness. You're actively trying to make that shape that's in front of you, okay? And make it special to that shape, okay? And there you go, kind of have it there. So there is the votive candle, kind of, again, right next to the first one. Now, the larger item, and it's good to have things that you're drawing that are different sizes, different shapes, because that means that you have to use proportion to make sure that you're comparing all the shapes together. So the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to realize that this bottle, this big, herb bottle that I have over here, right? It's way taller and has a really specific shape in comparison to the first two shapes. And I have this bottle kind of just resting behind right between these two things. And if I really had to give myself a guide, looking at those items and looking at the size of those items, that bottle is about 3 times the size of this paint, of this little paint jar that I've already painted. So I can take the size of this, and this is what proportion is when you compare the sizes of things, right? You can go like this, and I can go like 1, 2, and then like a little bit more. This bottle really is that tall in comparison to these shapes down here. That's how tall it is, and you have to compare those things, right? So I'm gonna start making my darkness, okay? Again, I'm not worried about details. I'm not worried about, I'm just gonna fix this because it's got a little crooked. I'm not worried about details. I'm worried about just finding the shape of it, right? So I'm gonna start my darkness, right? I'm gonna let that darkness grow, working in that tight circle, making that blackness get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, right? And then I'm gonna figure out how wide this is. This kind of goes out to about there, I find, and then this goes out to about the middle of here, and then the bottle goes straight down, right? So I'm not gonna draw a line and then be absent-mindedly just fill it in. I have to control my hand. So this whole thing comes down, comes down, comes down, comes down, comes down, comes down, goes right behind this. Now, because the silhouette is all shapes of black, and I wanna make sure that all my shapes are separate, I'm gonna try to leave a little bit of a white separation in between the items when they touch so that I can tell the difference, right? So I'm gonna bring this right into here, right? And then I'm gonna bring this around, bring it around, bring it around, bring it around, bring it around, right? And then this is coming this way, and then this is coming this way. Controlling, 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 always looking, always trying to get that right curve, that shape of the item, and be very careful with the actual shape of the bottle. You're not doing any bottle, you're doing the bottle that you're looking at. And this bottle has a really specific shape to it, has a really specific curve on the edge of it. The neck has a very specific shape to it. And when you draw it, you're trying to draw that bottle, not just the imaginary bottle in your head, but actually looking at this bottle, right? So now this item keeps on coming this way. The slope on this side comes to about there. And then all of a sudden it's coming down, 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 down. Again, I'm using tight circles. I want to create as solid of a blackness as possible. Always leaving that little bit of white in between the items if they're overlapping so that you can tell the difference between one item and the other and you don't lose the items. And you're going to fill, and make that darkness. So that's about the right size. This actually can come out a little bit farther out here. So I'm going to add a little bit more to this side, right? And then we have a little bit of information in here because this is all really connected in there. So we have the item over here. Now, this body tapers in, it gets skinnier as it goes into the neck of the bottle, right? So again, I have to kind of bring this up, and it comes up to a specific kind of height, and then bring it up, bring it up, bring it up, bring it up, right? And then over here it gets wider, and then the slope of the neck comes out, and now I have to I'm not making any bottle, I'm making that bottle. So I have to keep on looking at the bottle, and I have to keep on trying to perfect it so that I can create the actual shape that I'm looking at and not some imaginary bottle in my head, right? So I'm adding, I'm building from the middle, and I'm working my way outward. No outlines to help you here. This is just you controlling how your hand and how your eye are connected, right? And then there's this little fat part at the top over here that gets a little bit wider, so I'm gonna add some more over here, right? And over here on this side, this gets a little bit wider. It has kind of like a place to cork it that's a little bit, the glass gets a little bit wider at the top. And then there's an actual cork up here that I can see that's a different shape than the rest of it. Then trying to come back in here, control my edges, control all that. And then you have a silhouette drawing of the shapes that are here. Trying to clean up your end shapes, right? So then this is the silhouette of the drawing, right? And then, you know, this is what I'm looking at, trying to compare those two things together so that I can actually use observation to really discover the shapes from the inside out, okay? Now that's only one mark. We're gonna be practicing a lot of different types of marks in class, right? Okay, so this is the first mark. Again, we call this the silhouette mark, and it's made out of really tight circle marks that are that grow into the shape that you're looking at. And this is one of the first practices that we're going to be doing.